right, thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon, both in person and live on CSUDH TV. My name is Ken Seligson. I'm the chair of the Anthropology Department and president of the AIA-LA Archaeology Society. And today we are very excited to welcome back Dr. Jerry Moore for his book talk about cattails, his most recent publication. So I'm going to give a brief introduction, and then Jerry's going to give his book talk. There'll be time for Q&A, and then afterwards I hope you'll all join us down the road at SoCal Vibes for a light reception and gathering. So Dr. Jerry Moore is Distinguished Professor Emeritus of Anthropology at CSUDH. He had taught at CSUDH since 1991, or as an archaeologist would say, towards the end of the second millennium CE, and only recently retired in August 2024. He served as the anthropology chair for many years and was the chair who welcomed me to campus in fall 2019. He instilled in the department the approach and mantra that still guides our efforts today: do cool things with students and tell everyone about it. So many of you may know Jerry as a colleague, a former chair of the Academic Senate, or maybe a regular at Lounge Lizards. But hopefully you also know that he is an absolute giant in the field of archaeology, having been asked to serve as president of our largest professional organization, the Society for American Archaeology, and honored for his contributions to Peruvian archaeology in a special ceremony by the Peruvian National Archaeology Council. One of the foremost Andean archaeologists of the 20th and 21st centuries, he served as the longtime editor of the flagship Andean archaeology publication, Naupa Pacha, and has published numerous articles about his research at the site of Tumbes and in the Casma Valley of Peru, as well as in northern Baja California, and even in Kansas, across major peer-reviewed journals. Involving students in his research has always been a priority for Jerry, from taking them down to Peru and Baja as research assistants, to creating the ongoing archaeological research methods experience that we have in partnership with the Dominguez Rancho Adobe Museum down the block every spring. In addition to all of his teaching and service to DH, he somehow found time to write and publish 7 books on Andean archaeology, the archaeology of home and residential architecture, anthropological theory, and now, for his 8th book, his true passion, cats. Written for a broader public audience and published by Timms and Hudson, Cattails is a truly entertaining read with some amazing color images. I'm not saying that architecture and power in the pre-Hispanic Andes, the architecture of public buildings, was not a super fun read, but this most recent Jerry Moore joint is already a classic. It's clever and humorous, and I must warn you, a gateway to archaeology. He somehow makes technical archaeological methods and techniques easy to digest and flat out entertaining. And yes, this might be due in part to the incredible subject matter, which ranges from saber-toothed predators helping to shape our evolutionary trajectory in the caves and on the savannas of Africa, to Egyptian cat mummies being exported as manure, to mountain lion P-22 becoming a bona fide Hollywood star. I'm very excited to hear more about Jerry's wide-ranging and yet easily accessible research today. Please join me in welcoming back our distinguished colleague, Dr. Jerry Moore.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks for being here. And thank you, Ken, for organizing this, and everybody else. And because as everyone knows, I mean, Ken is not only has his teaching load and has a research project in Guatemala, Mexico, sorry. But he's also, as the department chair, the president of AIA-LA. Someone told me the other day you're running for governor. Is that right? That'd probably be too much. Anyway, thanks for being here. So there we are. We'll start with that, with the feline gaze. I think, like so many times, I have to start with a confession. I'd like to say that this research on cattails directly stemmed from my long-term work in the Andes, particularly since jaguars, mountain lions, and other cats are venerated supernatural creatures. But in fact, it didn't. In fact, it derived from this experience. This is Maya, stretched comfortably across my ample belly. And I remember sitting there in our living room and thinking, how did this happen? This is a really kind of curious set of relationships between human beings and these cats, different kinds of cats. And that was really the impetus for this. This is what really intrigued me. But it derives directly from my ideas about and philosophies of what anthropology should be. And this is a quote from the French social anthropologist Claude Lévi-Strauss, that he wrote, "Anthropology affords me intellectual satisfaction as a form of history linking up at opposite ends with world history and my own personal history. It thus reveals the rationale common to both." And then I think dovetails directly into that image you just saw of Maya on my lap. And it's very much the kind of archaeology and anthropology that I've always tried to practice. And of course, we consider archaeology in our field to be part of the larger discipline of anthropology, but it has some particular elements to it that not everybody recognizes. The first of this is that it extends our knowledge base beyond the written record, which of course is invaluable, but not utterly, but not as deep as the archaeological record is. The other part, as I note here, is that the archaeological record has both multicultural and multi-temporal perspectives, so that you can compare across different cultures at one time, and also within given cultural traditions, see how things change through time. And then the other thing that has always attracted me about archaeology is that we are just thieves. We are magpies. We will borrow data from other disciplines wherever we can find it. And this book and the thing I'm going to be talking about this afternoon is very much influenced by that selective thievery of looking at different kinds of sources of information. And then the final thing that I find always so fascinating about archaeology is that it often looks for origins, and once kind of identifying origins, looks for the complexities of the origins and their subsequent variations. But it almost always, in fact, it almost always should have that element of the unexpected to it. And so that led to this book, Cat Tales. It was a really fascinating experience for me as a writer, because I worked with this extraordinary team of Thames and Hudson, and they are one of the leading publishers, both in academics and other fields, that are both in London and in New York. And they brought to this process a level of expertise and of an investment that I have never had with any other publisher, and even publishers that I really enjoyed with. These folks saw this project, and I met with the acquisitions editor at a Society for American Archaeology meeting in New Orleans a couple of years ago, and 25 minutes into the conversation, he says, "We're doing this. This is something," and because it had a wider appeal. But beyond that, what they did is they invested a great deal of time and effort in the research into illustrations, into layout, into editing. And I can't say the result is perfect. We still can find some flaws in it, but it's a very strong product compared to other books that I've done, either on my own or with other publishers. Here we've got some reviews. This is from the late Brian Fagan, who passed away a few months ago. And he wrote this, "Cat Tales is an eloquent yet learned, blah, blah, blah. Reading Jerry's entertaining excursion into cattery." I'm not sure that's actually a proper word, but, and then Salima Ikram is a major Egyptologist who's done a lot of work on Egyptian veneration of cats and cat mummification. And you know, so these are some of the positive positive results. Teeming with interesting, well-sorted, and so on and so forth. And of course, you read these things, you get up in the middle of the night and go out and read these things just to make yourself feel better. And then you get these, right? Where on Google Books, 2 out of 5 stars, not that much about cats. Seems to have very little information about cats, just random facts, events, a hard read and not very interesting. Another person wrote the first 50 plus pages was about hominid archaeology with minimal information about the domestication of cats, and that's not why I bought the book. So you've got to be ready to deal with different kinds of audiences in a book like this. And this came to me a couple weeks ago, and it was just extraordinarily pleasing. Out of the blue, without an introduction, this author, Robert Harris, modestly described himself as an author working in historical and cultural nonfiction who had recently read the book. It does something I greatly admire. It treats a familiar subject as genuinely strange again, which I think that was a very nice compliment. And he goes on to talk about the book. Now, I had to go and look up who Robert Harris was, and it turns out he modestly described himself. He is an internationally known novelist, screenplay writer, historical fiction, something like, if you Google him on Google Authors, like 35 or 40 titles. And so on the one hand, you've got folks that say, well, you know, it was about this and this, and I'm not really all that interested in it. And then you've got someone who's written these other great historical novels and is thrilled by it. And it underscores, I think, the one solid rule of human behavior that anthropology forces us to accept, which is that some do, some don't. And that's basically true for every generalization that you could make for every society throughout time. And it's worthwhile remembering that, especially after you've invested as much time as I had in writing cat tales. So anyway, I found that really both fascinating, intimidating, and rewarding at the same time. The thing about the book where it starts, though, is to question the whole assumption that our relationship with cats was exclusively one between humans and pets. Because it turns out that felines were extraordinarily major predators on our hominid ancestors, as well as more recent humans. But it meant that you had to pay attention to them. It meant that you had to pay attention to sounds, to sights, in order to avoid being eaten. And that comes down to us in surprising ways. Now, this is a study that was published 5 years ago or so, identifying the most charismatic species recognized by people today. And this was done not for purposes of anthropology, but it was for purposes of advertising, for purposes of, for example, if you look at your Disney films, you're going to see tigers and lions. You're not going to see a Disney film about Molly the ringworm or something like that, right? I thought about that, but I decided not to follow that. And these charismatic ant species are particularly important in fundraising for conservation movements, and as well as the logos on zoos, Disney films, etc. And when I saw this, I thought, wow, this is really interesting, because of I think it's of the top 10 most charismatic species, tiger, lion, panther, cheetah are the cats. Like a significant number of those top 10 are cats. And koala bears are cute and everything, but they're at the end of the list on the far right. And that really caught my eye, because when I started thinking about these charismatic species, I realized that these were charismatic because you had to pay attention to them if you wanted to survive. And these charismatic, this is an example from an early hominid. It's somewhat controversial now, but that is a small subadult, and it actually has a skull fragment that perfectly fits the lower fang of, the holes in it perfectly fit the lower fang of a cheetah. So this was really interesting, because all these different lines of evidence converged on this relationship between hominids, our hominid ancestors, and felines, that meant attention had to be paid. These were animals that you needed to be alert to. And so what that then leads, of course, is to sites like this. This is just one of the great Pleistocene rock art sites. This is from Chauvet Cave. And by the way, I just saw yesterday or today that the Werner Herzog documentary about Chauvet Cave is back in theater release in LA. And there are some other online offerings as well. And this was a cave that had been sealed and had nobody go into it until the late 1970s. It had been sealed by rockfall. And within it was this absolutely fabulous depictions of different Pleistocene animals. The thing that's cool about this is that these animals that are depicted are charismatic species. They're not just a diorama of animals that I see in the course of my day. In fact, we have sites where there are these cave paintings and that have these kinds of animals depicted in them. And it turns out that when we do analyses of the Pleistocene diet, the Paleolithic diet, they're actually eating clams. So these aren't, a lot of times people talk about this as being hunting magic, and certainly there are examples of that. But these really focus on animals that are not only charismatic, but have been closely observed. And this is from one portion of the Chauvet Cave. This is called the Alcove of the Lions. So it's a small part of it. And what's going on here is that, especially in the upper right and lower right corners, the artists are depicting lions, individual lions that are moving their heads in particular ways. And this was discussed in an article by Craig Packer and Jean-Claude, in which this is Packer, who's the director of the Serengeti Lion Project. He says, we can see two cave lions, one of which is snarling while in a pose of submission. With a few simple lines, the drawing captures the expression and movement of the two lions and the way they place their bodies in relation to each other. The artist accurately recorded the way the big cats point their ears and hold their heads. Anyone who has spent time studying African lions will be stunned by the cave artist's skill at observing and recording animal behavior. This is just to keep going on, and I'll just drop down to the bold section here that talks about that particular interaction. Whichever situation is represented here, this is still Cloten and Packer, the painting seems like a snapshot of lion behavior, a realistic representation of a true life event the painter witnessed firsthand. And the artist must have been fairly close to record the nuances of the lion's facial expressions. And so what we have here is not just kind of a empty application of the term charisma to these animals, but we actually, through the cave art, have an indication that in fact those animals are very closely observed, and even though they are not pets, they're not food, they're predators, that they nonetheless fall into this category of the charismatic species. So when you have that cat, when I have that cat on my belly, I'm seeing that connection, because there is still that kind of charisma that I saw with our tango. Interestingly enough, though, cats aren't the first pets. We have earlier sites in the early Natufian site, and the Natufian is a Near Eastern culture that basically represents some of the first relatively permanent settlements in substantial dwellings in which people are intensive hunters and gatherers and food collectors, but not highly mobile, okay? And this, we think, pretty certain, sets the stage that ultimately produces agricultural communities. But here we have this woman, and I don't know how well you can see. So she's buried on her side, and you see how her hands are up by her head, and they're on top of her pet dog that's also been intentionally buried. And this is one of the earliest domesticated dogs that's known to archaeology. In fact, for some bizarre reason this last week, there was an article that came across my news feeds saying, oh, we found much older dogs. And we've known about this for years. I mean, you know, you wonder, oh, that's AIA. So cats are not the first pets. And we know of other animals that are also pets in prehistory and history. That kind of reaching out to another species and having that kind of intimate relationship with it, even in death, is something that we can find in the archaeological record. But here's the other really bizarre thing, and it took me about a month to convince myself that it was real. With the exception of Antarctica, which in this, of course, is shown enormous, and Australia, every other continent in the world has a small wild cat that you would think would be appropriate for domestication or for making into a pet. And yet, and improbably, as far as we know, all of the evidence right now points to a single wild species and an improbable set of interactions between that species, humans, and another species that we'll talk about in a second. That's not to say that people didn't interact with other feline species. So for example, here we have a 1700s picture from the Met with, from West India, showing Indian nobles who are hunting deer with trained cheetahs, right? And we know from Saudi Arabia and elsewhere that cheetahs are also used as hunting animals there. Within Asia, there are a number of small cats that you would think, well, this would be a candidate for domestication. And so the largest animal shown there is only 16 inches tall. Right? And so you would think that it would be, the domestication would be a relatively straightforward procedure, and one that would have not been limited to a single species. We know that some of these cats are being trained. These are hunting cats. We've got it on a leash on the bed. And it's not limited to Eurasia. We also have cats, the Andean cat, which is found in Western South America. And this is a relatively small, relatively non-ferocious feline. And it lives in these various habitats, wild habitats in the high Andes. And so you would think, well, why wasn't that one domesticated? Well, it turns out that it's probably not domesticated because its wild food source is the chinchilla. And the chinchillas live in high mountain areas, and so that's where the wild cat is found. In other words, it's away from human settlements. That's a really interesting counter case, because what we're going to see in just a second is that part of the key to domestication is the intersection of both cats, people, and pests, like these. I thought that was the rapture there. The domestication process of cats, as far as we can tell so far, is limited to a single species, Felis sylvestris libica, and it only comes into play once human beings have agriculture, have stored grains, have cats, wild cats in the vicinity, and then those mice come to town. Those mice migrate out of the Himalayas. And this is this incredible study to, I'm sorry that the images are pretty poor, but basically what you're being shown here is that 40,000 years ago, the only known examples of these early house mice are in the Himalayas, and then basically they begin to expand towards the Near East and ultimately into the Mediterranean over the next 10,000 years. So it's not just the presence or absence of a tameable cat. It's also having agriculture with stored grains that attract an animal in sufficient density to create the setting for that domestication process. And these, this happens. We've got early sites. This is an early Natufian site. These are not agriculturalists per se, but they are intensive collectors of wild wheats and grains. They live in relatively permanent settlements. They have storage grains, and guess what? They've got mice. And that is the part of the key to the process of domestication of cats, because that's enough to bring this animal in from the wild into the human habitat and begin to that long process of interactions that we have with humans, cats, and mice. We actually had a whole infestation of mice this last winter in our house, and it was disgusting because our cats had all died, anyway. But anyway, what this then leads to is just another bizarre and unexpected tale about agriculture and these seafaring cats. you've all heard the phrase like a cat takes to water as something like that's something that cats are going to avoid. But it turns out that even if cats wanted to avoid it, people on ships with stored grains in their hulls needed to have cats to be sure that there was something to eat at the end of the voyage. And this happens early. This is a site, I think, on the south coast of Crete. And Crete was never, during this time period, was not directly connected to the Eurasian mainland. So it was always, all immigration had to be on board. And you've got here a burial, another burial of a young man who on the left-hand side is in the drawing is shown up there on the right. And below him is a cat that is assumed to be his pet. There's several interesting things about the burial. One, the cat's intact. Okay. The second thing about it is that the cat bones, where the joints are, there's no dirt in between them. So the whole animal was intact when it was laid down. It wasn't a piecemeal internment. Okay? And this is one of the earliest cat burials that we know about, but now there are hundreds and hundreds of these. And so this connects the ocean-going traffic of agricultural peoples with grains and other foods in the hulls of their ship and having cats along. And that's a really important part of the whole story. In fact, one of the most fascinating stories I came across was from this Kitab al-Hayawan from the 8th century AD. And basically it's a story about the creation. Basically that's what it is. And it tells the story of Noah and the animals on the ark. And the animals all come to Noah and they say, look, Noah, you've got to do something about these mice. Because they're eating all the food and we're starving to death. We want you to kill the mice. And Noah says, I can't do that. I mean, would be in defiance of my promise to God that I would bring 2 of every living creature onto the ark in order to repopulate the world. And the other animals are standing around and say, well, you've got to do something. And as this conference is taking place, this kind of council of Noah and the animals, Noah is apparently scratching the muzzle of one of the lions, and the lion sneezes, and the snot hits the deck, and cats miraculously form. A great story. And so they go out and they're able to eat the mice, save the day, and ship-going cats are part of the nautical tradition for hundreds and hundreds of years. As well as the description of these mice, imported mice, as being like thieves. Now this is from a early Mesoamerican document, early historical document, a collaboration between the priest of Sahagún and Nahua or Aztec scribes. And they describe these house mice that must have jumped ship with early explorers, because there are no mice like this in the Native Americas. And this Florentine, version of the Florentine Codex is actually up here at the Getty Museum. And this is its food is about the mice. Its food is maize. It eats ripe ears of maize. It eats chilies, gourd seeds, and chia. It eats chocolate and cacao beans. It eats like a human being. It gnaws, it shreds the capes of the precious feathers. Whatsoever is guarded as precious, it gnaws it all, it damages all, no matter where it is, no matter if it's carefully guarded as precious, no matter how inaccessible the place it enters, it damages the precious things. And so the Nawa, and of course this is a post-contact introduction, apply the name for mouse, Grimchin, which becomes a euphemism for a foreign spy. It's kind of like the way that we use the word rat. You know, someone rats on us, and it's a spy. And so this relationship between cats, mice, stored grains, and boats, this is the way that those animals got all around the world, including along the Nile. And this is one of the places where people start asking about the origins of cats. This is one of the places that they immediately go to. In fact, Ken had mentioned this in the introduction, because there are both cats and catacombs along the Nile. And of course, as you all know, the Egyptians mummified all sorts of things. In fact, one of the earliest Egyptian mummies is of a pygmy hippopotami. And as well as humans and monkeys and scarlet ibises and things like that. But they mummified a lot of cats. In fact, one of the most kind of mind-boggling things I learned in the course of this research was the ancient Egyptians made more mummies than they made any other kind of artifact. They made more mummies than they did plates or bowls or things of that sort. And on the far right there is an image of an X-ray image, in fact, one of the earliest X-ray images showing a cat mummy, showing the skeleton of the mummy inside. And so this is one of the reasons that people often think that cats were first domesticated along the Nile. That doesn't seem to be true, but they certainly were venerated, raised, and used in all sorts of different ways, and buried in cemeteries by the tens and hundreds of thousands. This is some cat cemeteries by the early dynastics, stepped pyramid of Saqqara, this is, Kim was already alluding to some of these things because I talked a little bit about them before. You see these two gentlemen with a kind of a stretcher, and that's a pile of cat mummies there. This is one of my favorite characters. I haven't had a chance to read more about him, but this Sir William Martin Conway was a character who could have stepped out of the pages of Sherlock Holmes. You know, he won his knighthood for doing a map of the Hindu Kush. He wrote books on 18th century woodworking in Holland. And he also wrote a book, Cats of Ancient Egypt. And as I quote here, it's been said with truth that one of the greatest triumphs of human perseverance is the domestication of the cat. And there's this one shrine site called Speos Artemidos, which was venerated by burying cat mummies. But it was also then plundered repeatedly by folks on the one hand who were looting the burials and then selling the cat mummies to tourists to take home because, you know, it was lightweight, it was convenient, you could put it in your luggage and take it home. But in addition to that, Conway writes that some contractor came along and offered so much £1 for their bones to make something. Think soap or tooth powder, I dare say, or even black paint. So that people went in and started looting these cemeteries. And in the last sentence, Conway writes, "The rags and other refuse, it appears, make excellent manure, and donkey loads of them were carried off to the fields to serve that useful, if unromantic, purpose." And this is a picture from I forget the name of the daily paper in which something like 180,000 mummified cats were offloaded at Liverpool and taken out and used as fertilizer on fields. This is one of my favorite drawings. Unfortunately, we couldn't put it in the book because the book is designed to appear in 5 or 6 different languages, and so this wouldn't translate. But I just love this thing. Is these shocked British farm workers as these mummified cats come out and and stare them down with this deadly I-beam, and it says the horrible result of using the Egyptian fertilizer. And I'm so sorry that couldn't make it into the book, but I had to share it with you today. But that's not the only way that cats have been captivating. Cats throughout Mesoamerica were venerated, sacrificed, killed, butchered, traded. And this is actually a tribute page from Dr. Gasca up in the far left-hand corner, upper corner. That's part of the tribute page that her province in southern Mexico paid to the Aztecs. And as you see, some of the things they paid were tropical feathers, bundles of cacao, chocolate, but also jaguar pelts. And that, of course, is not something that's unique to that one region in Mesoamerica. At various sites from various time periods, we have the veneration and use of cats. And this is not something, so this has been, I'm showing you a picture of this I'm going to show you some pictures from the site of Copan, which is down there in Honduras, in the kind of the lower right-hand corner of the picture. What's really fascinating, something that's only, I think, starting to be recognized in the last decade or so, is just how far and extensive the pre-Columbian trade in living large felines was. Now, they were also just brought in and sacrificed, and at the bottom of this pyramid at Copan, there is a cyst that is known as the Montmont cyst, and because of the dating, the calendrical dating is being so precise, it's known pretty certainly when that dated to, and I can't remember off the top of my head what it dates to, but it's at the base of this pyramid here, and at altar Q. Now, this is from work by Nawa Sugiyama, who is a professor at UC Riverside, and I forget where Bill is and Christine are, but Nawa is really on the cutting edge of understanding the long distance trade of living animals in Mesoamerica. And so what we have here is we've got this precisely dated altar Q that looks like, in many ways, artwork that's found at Teotihuacan in the center part of Mexico. And it's precisely dated, so it's dated to AD 776. And there are very few places in the pre-Columbia world where you can get that kind of precise date. And it had a total, about second line, of 14 individual felids, at least 6 of which are jaguars. Okay. Now, to put that into perspective, jaguars are primary predators. So they necessarily have relatively large territories that they hunt over. So getting 6 or more was some trick, and they were put into this dedicatory burial. That gives you an idea of what you might be dealing with. There's a little centimeter scale over there, And that's the skull of a jaguar. And again, this is pretty obvious, but just so you don't worry as you leave the room tonight, we don't have jaguars in the area, but they are really deadly creatures. Almost every cat, from a cheetah to Pixie on my lap, if it's going to kill a game, it comes up underneath and grabs the windpipe and breaks the windpipe. Jaguars don't mess. Jaguars jump on the back of the animal and they drive their fangs through its skull, including into the skulls of cattle. Okay. And if you want, and here's just a couple of images of jaguars hunting. If you want to spend some interesting hours on Google, start looking at Google videos on jaguars killing caimans. And they are amazing. There's this video out there where the jaguar is up in a tree overlooking the river, right? And it sees the caiman, it jumps out into the water, bites the caiman in the skull. And it's got this caiman by the skull, right? And the caiman has like a 5 to 6 foot tail out here. So it's like this, right? And that jaguar takes that, swims with the animal up to the bank, carries it up like a 12, 15 foot river bank, and kills it. Jaguars, one of the ways they kill cattle is they hop on their backs and drive their fangs through their skulls. It makes you rethink that desire you had of taking that Amazon boat trip, you know? And so here on the other side, the jaguars there on a tapir. And so that raised another issue, is that you've got these animals that are so deadly. We've got these animals that we know from a variety of studies are found in archaeological sites hundreds of miles away from their natural habitats. How did that happen? And it's still unclear. I mean, in the 1920s, an ethnographer by the name of Paul Fejos worked with a Amazon Indian group and actually documented some of the ways they trapped live animals. And these are some of their box traps. And you can see down here on the lower left, they've got a jaguar pelt that they've done there. They've got there. They usually would, take one of their chickens and tie a rope around it so it's bait. But, it's one thing to have the jaguar inside that box and then you come and kill it with a spear. It's another thing to have a living jaguar inside that box that you're then going to transport by hand for 2,000 miles. Okay. And that is, in fact, what seems to have happened with jaguars being transported all the way up to Teotihuacan. Years ago, on our way back from Chiapas, we had the opportunity to visit a project that was doing a tunnel under the pyramid of the moon. And the archaeologists led us through, and it was really cool because they had come across a cage, a wooden cage that had the bones of a jaguar in it that had been put in there as a dedicatory offering. And you knew the animal had been placed there alive because the bars were all chewed. It was cool but freaky. And we also know that in the Aztec period, Moctezuma, in his palace at what's now Mexico City, had a variety of animals, not only wild animals, but he actually had a human zoo as well, with various kinds of like albino people and various sorts of folks that this illustration depicts, and as well as ponds for fish, for waterfowl, and cages for these ferocious animals. And our fascination with these animals is not abated. This is the great story of Joe Exotic on the Tiger King, which was in the news when I was working on this book. It's estimated that there's, I forget the total number, but something like, I think about 1,200 large cats are in the United States, and about 700 of them are actually in licensed, certified facilities. The others are in private ownership and this and that. In fact, one person suggested that if you really wanted to go see tigers, that you just wouldn't waste your money on a flight to Mumbai. Just go to Houston, rent a car within, in ranches within about 100 miles. There are all sorts of folks that have tigers. And this is from Joe Exotic's. Federal authorities seized 68 tigers, lions, a jaguar, and other big cats in his Tiger King Park. This is now with a law that Joe Biden signed in, and which has, I guess, avoided scrutiny to this date by the President administration. That was the first time we had a federal law forbidding the private ownership of cats. And then, of course, Siegfried and Roy. And when I was writing this book, Roy died of COVID, actually, sorry to say. But this was, it turns out, their final act in Las Vegas when the tiger attacked him. This was one of the tiger, I forget the tiger's name, that they'd worked with before, and something freaked him out and he attacked him and broke into the skull. The animal was finally driven off by a stage crew using fire extinguishers and things like that. They drug him out, they saved his life. And this is what this man says about this cat. He was trying to save me. Which I think just underscores the curious relationship that we have with these different animals. And of course, we've seen that in our own cultural history recently. This is that great Hollywood sign photograph of P-22, the Hollywood cat. And it's interesting to realize that there are two metropolitan areas in the world that have large, big game in them. One is Mumbai and the other is Los Angeles. And the death of this animal, which I know you all followed probably in the news, has finally led to the, I guess we're in the last stages of the creation of the Annenberg Wildlife Overcrossing over Highway 101. I think that's in the last stages. So I think this fascination with cats is something that's really very deep in the human experience. It's certainly broadly held, and although it might have been shaped by our Paleolithic past, it's certainly not something that's extinct to us. And I want to just close by saying, so why would I look into this? And I love this quote from Orwell. So long as I remain alive and well, I shall continue to feel strongly about prose style, to love the surface of the earth, and to take pleasure in solid objects and scraps of useless information. And it is also an example of what I started off talking about this extension of empathy, that we humans are the same in fundamentally different and interesting ways. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jerry. That was amazing. We do have time for questions, if anyone would like to ask Jerry a question. Yeah.
You answered it partially, and I was curious to know if cats were used as tools for doing things like hunting and things like that, like they've done with dogs. There have been so many different ways that dogs have been used. And you showed us the picture of the jaguars or being used, or cheetahs being used for hunting. Has that continued into the modern times in any way?
I don't have a specific date, but I think as recently as in the last decade, there have been cheetahs used to hunt a kind of antelope I think in Saudi Arabia. I think that's right. I'd have to double check on that. But that's one of the few examples of that I know of. I know of nothing like that, for example, in South America. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. This is a very, very impressive presentation. I'm just wondering, is there a period when cats moved from predators to pets? Did you get a history? At what point in our history did we begin to domesticate cats? Number one. Number two, are there regions, tribes, natives that have this as a delicacy? Any of these cats as food?
As a food.
Yeah.
The second part of your question is the easier one to deal with. Not that I know of. The only cases that I came across where cats were regularly consumed was either if it was, in a couple of cases, there were rituals that might be placed, but the most common situation where cats are eaten, especially domesticated cats are eaten, is when there's a siege and there's a famine. They're desperation food. The first part of your question again, what was it?
At what point did we get to a point of domesticating any of these cats? I know that people have lions, jaguars, cheetahs domesticated in their farms. At what point do you get to that transition?
Yeah, I think all of it traces back to that encounter between human beings, agricultural products that get stored, the westward migration of the brown mice, which originate in the Himalayas, that creates a sufficient density of food to encourage wildcats to come into the human habitat. And that seems to be the pivot. And it also seems to be a relatively unique part of the human experience. So even, for example, there are Mesoamerican sites where, and sites in the American Southwest, for instance, where you've got stored grains, you've got agriculture, you've got stored grains, you've got actual evidence of rodent pests in the granaries, in the storerooms, and you have animals, cats, wild cats, that you would think might be candidates for domestication, but it doesn't happen. Yeah.
Hello. So this is more of a comment than a question. But one of my favorite books that I've read that's anthropological is Donna Haraway's When Species Meet. And basically she started with her relationship with her Australian shepherds. She as a hobby taught them to do sheep herding and things. Uh-huh. And so she started to think, about the human relationship with dogs. And so what I thought was very interesting is this is a archaeological, historical kind of approach to it. And then she takes that more biological kind of interspecies approach to a very similar question.
Yeah, I know of that book. I haven't read it. And it just got to a point where I'd say, okay, we've got to get our arms around this literature here. But I know of that book. Thanks for bringing it up. Behind you, I think.
Hi, I'm sorry I got here a little late, but I was wondering, I can't wait to read the book. When is it out already?
Yeah, and to put in a shameless plug, the publisher's Thames and Hudson.
Okay.
And over on the sideboard, they sent me a discount code. Oh. So you can go to their webpage, you can buy the book online, and I forget, a 10% discount, but free shipping from England.
Okay.
So it's out, but it's also at Barnes & Noble. It's been at Vroman's in downtown Pasadena. Sorry, is it at the Hammer Museum? Okay.
And I also, thank you, and I also have another question. I've been doing a lot of intensive research on just jaguars in Mesoamerica. Part of my research is on Mesoamerican rain gods, and it's attached to the jaguar. And,
Right.
and so I've been looking at, the earliest place where we find it iconographically is with formative with the Olmec. But then I did some more research, and there's some rock shelters in Colombia and a plateau where the earliest representations of jaguars as, in your perspective, in your own research, are they just being honored as or seen as just this great hunter, this predator, or someone to learn from?
I hesitate to try to even answer that question, because whenever I have looked at ethnographic studies of native cultures in South America, I'm struck by the variation in explanations for the relationships between humans and felines. On the one hand, I think we're on safe ground by saying they're venerated widely. On the other hand, the exact relationship between, for example, a human spirit during the day versus at night, because some places will have a wandering spirit at night, and the jaguar spirits, that varies enormously between different cultural traditions, even within native South America. So I think that's, and if there are a number of those cases that I reference in the book, but I'm not fluent enough in that literature. I said, okay, I can't add another 100 pages to this manuscript. Yeah. Yes.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you for presenting. I really found your presentation very thought-provoking. But one of the main thoughts that I had was, do you think that it was wise for us to domesticate cats? Because as I'm looking at your presentation, and then me also just loving cats, I feel like we've kind of colonized a little bit. Like, they were natural, free out in the environment, and now we've brought them into our homes. Can that, in the long term, be healthy for us or the cats?
I don't think we had any choice. I think they showed up on those doorsteps, and they were in there as soon as humans had large storage areas of grains that were attracting this mouse that created a dense enough food supply that wild cats were attracted to us. I don't know who domesticated whom, to be honest.
Well, you're saying that we didn't have a choice, that they actually came to some sort of help for us to kind of maintain or eat the mice. Well, then I will propose again that we did have a choice, because what attracted those mice to us?
Yeah,
Like
we were creating those food supplies for our own purposes. They had unanticipated consequences, not only for mice, but also for cats. And both of those species took advantage, or not took advantage, but used those environments that humans created to their own immediate reproductive and other purposes, I think.
I don't really understand. Like, it's how are we not having a choice? And okay, we see these cats coming up. They're like, okay, cool, kill the mouse, yeah. So then we pick them up and take them into our homes? Because you showed us pictures of people laying with these cats, meaning that they were in their homes all on.
Oh, actually, I showed you pictures of people being buried with their cats. So it's even, there's a definite relationship there. Yeah, I'm not saying that humans didn't have a purpose or role in there, and that it could have gone some other way. But I'm also trying to make the point that that humans aren't the only active actors in this complex set of interactions.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you. As always, Jerry, it was a pleasure to hear this academic talk. I was wondering, is there, you made the point that it seems like there was one particular species that was sort of adopted and then used and spread for domestication. And I was just wondering, in your research, if you happened to come upon any ideas about that. The idea is that maybe there was something special about that particular species, or was it just chance? I mean, we see people, in other places that they will have cheetahs as pets and some of these big cats, which occasionally can be dangerous. But I just wondered if there's something special about the species that ended up being the template for pets.
That's a fundamental question, obviously. And what I can't tell you is what genetic trait those wild cats in Western Eurasia might have had, okay, that might have set them apart from other species, okay? I don't know the answer to that question. What I'm trying to draw our attention to is that it's this intersection of different actors and actions. Humans, cats, plant domestication, food storage, relatively permanent, if not year-round occupations, large densities of stored grains, etc., that's creating the environment in which these mutual adaptations take place. And right now, that's about as close to a definitive answer as I could get. Yeah.
Hi,
Hi.
thank you. I really enjoyed your presentation.
Thank you.
My question is regarding early hominid interactions with felines. Do you have any information regarding like the differences between our early ancestors interacting with felines and other hominid species like Neanderthals?
Yes, and the cop-out answer, it varies. No, but seriously, we have, for example, we have caves in the Sierra de Atapuerca in Spain, in which we have examples of humans that have been killed by cats and then are intentionally buried in a communal human cemetery, okay? We've got examples of, I'm trying to think of other kinds of cases like that. But when we're talking about cats, we're talking about obviously lots of different species of different sizes with different temperaments with different deadliness. And so depending on what kind of cat we might be talking about, that's going to shape that interaction. I mean, we wouldn't have been, and it's been really interesting in the last 2 or 3 weeks, we've had a number of cases here in California where there have been large predators, both bears in Monrovia and wolf in, I forget where it was, in Northern California, as well as other cats, wild cats that come into the human experience. And our ways of dealing with them aren't predictable. We venerate them, we kill them. We had the bear in, I think it was Monrovia, was it last week, that was euthanized? 2 weeks ago, something like that. So I think what we should expect is exactly that same sort of variation in our interactions, particularly at these points prior to domestication and prior to cats being pets, when the balance of power was pretty even. I think we should expect there to be variation as opposed to a single pattern.
Hi, Dr. Moore.
Hi.
I really loved your positive examples we showed, and I was curious if you had or came across any examples of cats that were of negative connotation or relationship similar to how some Middle Eastern countries or Asian countries have a negative connotation to dogs.
No, in fact, it's the opposite. So, for example, one of the, for instance, people often ask about, in Islamic traditions, and I'm using that term very broadly, dogs are not eaten because they're considered to be filthy.
Mm-hmm.
Cats are not eaten because they're considered to be holy.
Interesting.
And part of that goes back to that legend I told you about the miraculous creation of cats on Noah's Ark. So, so there's some great pictures that they came up with of mosques that just are lined with cats. And this is not something that's a recent phenomenon. We've got archaeological excavations in 13 mosques from the 1300s and 1400s, is what I remember. And they've got cat burials everywhere. They've got them in people's dining rooms. They've got them out, you know. And it's not because they're eating the cats. It's not because the cats are being discarded. It's because they're being respected and venerated and kept at home.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Adding on to that question, is that influenced by ancient Egyptian geopolitical influence in ancient times?
Only, as far as I could tell you, only in a rather indirect way. The cases I was just talking about are more directly influenced by Islamic beliefs rather than ancient Egyptian ones. Yes?
What are the earliest folk tales associated with cats, and how did they depict the cats?
In all honesty, I don't know the answer to that question. I'm sorry, I don't. The earliest folk tales, that's outside of my field. I just don't know the answer to the question. I had my hands full just trying to figure out what the earliest sites were. Sorry.
Okay. Any final questions? Yeah, sure.
I was sitting here thinking, one place that I have seen cats, big cats, depicted a lot is in the Roman world, in gladiators and things like that. Were they? Do you know if they were considered to be more majestic or venerated than, let's say, having a bear or something come out and fight the gladiators?
That's a very good question. In fact, there's a really fascinating Roman period archaeological site on the Red Sea called Berenike, in which its key was it was a port that was like a 3-day travel to the Nile. And there were oases in there. And that was a port where not only tigers and lions were imported from Africa and the Indian subcontinent, but war elephants were imported there. And the prospect, I've always wondered what the prospect of setting sail across the Indian Ocean with a live war elephant might be. But fascinating sight, because in addition to the settlement and the port, they also have one of the best known archaeological examples of a pet cemetery. Oh, wow. And you have these folks that you would imagine being some kind of, rough and tumble port city, we'll bring them in, that sort of thing. But here they are with a mummified scarlet ibis or a pet monkey buried next to them. So that's not quite directly to your answer, but yes, actually one of the quotes I use that's in the book is this proclamation that I forget which Roman emperor made just about how many elephants he was responsible for having slaughtered, how many lions they brought in and had killed. And it was a mark of just his power and esteem to be able to engage in that kind of what we think of today as a barbarous display of violence, but part of the fascinating interaction that humans and cats have had.
And I guess it ties into that the charismatic animals that you were showing us, those ones that were that entertained people the most.
Yeah, and I mean, I know a number of you folks have done travels in both Roman sites and Greek sites, but one of the things that we've only started doing this in the last decade or so, and one of the things that was really striking was to see that in Greek theaters, the emphasis was creating a space where you could hear the words. In Roman Colosseums, the emphasis was on being able to have a clear view of the gore. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Jerry, on that note.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you all. Thank you all so much for coming out this afternoon and for tuning in on CSUDH TV. Please grab some cookies, some coffee, some water before you head out, or come and join us down the block at SoCal Vibes for a post-talk reception where you can hear what Jerry really thinks about cats. So, thank you so much again, Jerry.
Thank you very much.
Thank you everyone
Thank you
for coming
all.
out.